today's mindful moment, packed with insights but designed to fit into your busy life. We all want freedom, right? Like it's this basic human thing.
Yeah, for sure.
But what if the freedom that we've been, told is so important, the kind that comes with a free market? What if that's, what if it's not all it's cracked up to be?
Interesting.
Like, what if it's more about helping those who are already powerful? Not the average person.
I see where you're going with this.
Exactly. So today we're going deep into The Big Myth by Naomi Oreskes and Erik Conway.
Oh, great book.
Yeah, it really gets into the history of market fundamentalism in America. And, well, it's pretty surprising stuff.
It really is. Like how this whole concept of the market, like it's some big important thing with a capital M. How'd that even happen?
Yeah, like we're not talking about just a regular market, like where you buy groceries.
Right, exactly. The book says it's a pretty recent idea, and it was, well, kind of manipulated into existence.
So not some timeless truth that's always been there.
Yeah. And according to The Big Myth, the main thing these market fundamentalists believe, the core of it all, is that the government, even when it's trying to do good, it just messes everything up.
Like it's getting in the way of this magical market doing its thing.
Exactly.
But the book isn't all just theory, right?
Yeah.
It really digs into the history of how this all happened.
Oh, yeah. And that's where it gets really interesting. It shows how there was this whole organized campaign.
A campaign?
Yeah, like a deliberate, well-funded effort, and it went on for decades.
Wow. To spread this ideology.
Yeah, and get this, it involved all sorts of people, like big names, powerful organizations, even children's authors.
Wait, hold on. Children's authors. That's a bit creepy, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I'm starting to think there's a whole side to this story that most of us just don't know about.
There is. For example, the book exposes how groups like, the National Association of Manufacturers, and NNM,
Yeah.
They use textbooks, radio shows, even Hollywood movies, you name it, to push this pro-business, anti-government message.
So it's not just about lobbying, like trying to change specific laws.
No.
It's bigger, isn't it? They wanted to control how people saw the world.
Exactly. Control the narrative. And it wasn't always, on the up and up. Sometimes they were straight up fighting the facts.
Just to protect their own interests.
You got it. So, we always hear about how America was founded on free enterprise, like it's right there in the Constitution.
Yeah, that's kind of the story, isn't it?
Right. But The Big Myth takes that idea and, blows it out of the water.
Really?
The authors show that the U.S. government has been involved in the marketplace from the very beginning.
Okay, but how?
Well, think about it. Early American corporations, they were actually state chartered.
So the government was giving them permission to exist in the first place.
Exactly. And often they would impose conditions, like these corporations had to actually do something for the public good.
That doesn't sound very hands-off.
Not at all. And that goes against everything groups like NM say, about how government intervention is always bad.
So right from the start, there's this mismatch between the myth and the reality.
Yeah.
And doesn't this pattern keep going, like when they fought against those child labor laws in the early 1900s?
Oh, absolutely. That's where we really see how NM operated. They went all out to oppose the Keating-Owen Child Labor Act.
Which was, remind me.
It was supposed to ban goods made by kids from being traded between states.
Right. So did they just, argue against it logically?
Oh, no, they went way beyond that.
Like what?
They would flat out lie about how bad child labor was, downplaying the whole thing.
Oh, what?
And then they'd use these slippery slope arguments saying any regulation of child labor would lead to the government, controlling kids' lives.
That's pretty extreme.
It was all about scaring people.
It's crazy how they twisted protecting children into some attack on freedom.
It's a classic tactic, really. Those in power, they'll do whatever it takes to protect their profits.
Even if it means, kids are suffering.
Even then. And their campaign didn't stop there. Oh, no. They went after worker protections, too.
Like what?
Things like workmen's compensation laws, helping workers who get hurt on the job.
So they were against that.
Totally.
Wow. Instead of supporting something that would, protect workers from financial ruin, they fought it tooth and nail.
Same tactics, too. Fear-mongering, saying it was an attack on property rights, a slippery slope to socialism, the whole spiel.
So basically, they were okay with risking workers' health and safety just to stay ahead of the competition.
That was their logic, sad to say. Profits over people. But maybe the most shocking thing in The Big Myth is how they went after education and public opinion.
Okay, now this is getting serious.
Right. We're not talking about lobbying anymore. This is about shaping the minds of future generations.
Saving minds, huh?
Yeah, groups like, the National Electric Light Association, NELA, they were big in the utility industry.
Okay.
They actually tried to control what was going into textbooks used in American schools.
What? Seriously, why? What were they so afraid of?
Anything that made their industry look bad.
Like what?
Stuff about watered stock, which is basically, inflating a company's value.
Oh, right, like a scam.
Yeah, or unfair pricing. Anything that showed they weren't perfect, basically.
So it's like they wanted to rewrite history to make themselves look good.
Pretty much. They knew if they could control how people understood the past, they could control how they saw the present, too.
And this wasn't just a one-time thing, right?
Nope. NAM was back at it in the 1940s.
What'd they do then?
They hired academics to go through textbooks and attack any that weren't pro-business enough.
Seriously?
And they pressured publishers to change or just get rid of those books.
Wow. It makes you wonder how much of what we learned in school was actually, influenced by this stuff.
It's a good question, right? Makes you think about who you can trust and how easy it is to manipulate information.
It's like a warning sign, isn't it? Be careful what you believe, especially when it comes to something like the free market.
Absolutely. We got to be aware of the agendas hiding behind all those seemingly neutral sources. And get this, it wasn't just textbooks they went after.
What else?
They got into entertainment too, like children's books and radio shows.
No way, children's books. Are you serious?
Totally serious. And this is where Laura Ingalls Wilder comes in.
Wait, the Little House on the Prairie lady.
The one and only. But here's the twist. Her daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, she was a huge believer in this market fundamentalism stuff, and she was dead set against the New Deal.
Really?
Yeah, and she had a big influence on her mother's writing.
So those stories about pioneer life, all that self-sufficiency and overcoming hardship, that was being used to push an ideology.
Kinda, yeah. They were romanticizing this idea of independence, downplaying the role of government help and community support.
That's sneaky.
It is, like hiding something you don't want people to see. And then there's another example. ANA had this radio program called The American Family Robinson.
Okay, what was that all about?
On the surface, it was just a family show, wholesome stuff. The Robinsons, this fictional family, they always solve their problems through hard work and individual effort.
Sounds innocent enough. What's the catch?
The message underneath it all was pretty clear. Government is bad, social programs are unnecessary, and you only get security through a job, not any kind of safety net.
So they were using this family show to push their own values, their own agenda.
Exactly. And it probably worked really well because it was entertaining and relatable. People were absorbing propaganda without even knowing it.
It's amazing how subtle they were about it.
It's insidious, really. But radio was just one part of it. They also had their eyes on Hollywood.
Really? Hollywood, too?
Oh, yeah. NEM worked directly with studios, shaping movie scripts and newsreels to make their pro-business message look good.
Wow. They were going all out to control the message people were getting.
They were. And they even influenced the FBI to label certain films as communist propaganda.
That's some serious power. It's kind of scary to think about.
It is. It reminds us that we can't just passively consume media. We got to be critical, always looking for those hidden agendas. Just because something's popular or fun to watch doesn't mean it's not trying to sell us something.
So they targeted textbooks, radio, and even Hollywood. The big question is, did it work? Did they actually change how America does economics?
That's what we'll look at next time.
Ooh, this is getting good. Stay tuned because things are about to get even more interesting. We'll uncover the long-term impact of these campaigns and how they led to the rise of neoliberalism and all the stuff that came with it.
It's like they were planting these seeds, right?
Seeds.
Yeah, these ideas, they might not have had like a huge impact right away.
Ah, okay.
But over time, they really influenced how people thought about the economy.
So it's about the long game, right? But how did these campaigns, the ones targeting textbooks and movies and all that, how did they actually lead to, real policy changes?
Well, think about it. They spent decades making people suspicious of the government.
Like saying the government was the enemy of freedom.
Exactly, and that the free market was the solution to every problem.
So it wasn't just some abstract idea. It had, real consequences for people's lives.
Oh, absolutely. And those ideas, they set the stage for what we call neoliberalism.
Neoliberalism. Right. That became, the big thing in American economics, starting in the 80s?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, but for those of us who, aren't economists, what does that actually mean? What does neoliberalism look like in the real world?
Think deregulation, privatization, tax cuts for the rich. and, well, basically a much weaker safety net.
So less help for those who need it.
Yeah, the idea is that the market knows best and the government should just, get out of the way.
And this is where Ronald Reagan comes in, right? He's like the poster boy for all of this.
He's definitely a key figure. All that talk about getting government off our backs, it really resonated with people.
Because of those decades of, anti-government messaging we talked about.
Exactly. And his policies, like those tax cuts and deregulation, they were, they came straight from this market fundamentalist playbook.
But did they work?
Yeah.
Did they actually make things better for everyone like they promised?
That's a complicated question. The big myth argues that some people definitely benefited, but for most people, it was a mixed bag.
Mixed bag, huh? Like, give me an example of where this free market experiment, didn't quite work out.
Take the deregulation of the savings and loan industry in the 80s.
Oh, right. What was that about again?
It was supposed to, unleash the power of the market, more efficiency, lower costs for everyone. That was the idea.
Sounds good on paper.
Right. But instead, it led to a ton of fraud and this massive bailout that cost taxpayers billions.
So much for the magic of the market.
Yeah, sometimes removing those safeguards, it can backfire pretty badly.
And what about the environment? It seems like relying on the market to protect the environment, well, it doesn't always work out so well.
Definitely not. The book talks about how the Reagan administration, they weakened a lot of environmental regulations.
Putting industry interests ahead of, the planet's health.
It was like they thought the market would magically solve everything, even though there was tons of evidence that it wouldn't.
A lot of faith in something that hadn't really proven itself.
It's a common theme with market fundamentalists. They tend to downplay environmental concerns, resist regulations, and just assume technology will fix it all.
But this wasn't just a Reagan thing, right? It feels like that kind of thinking is still around today.
Oh, absolutely. This belief that the market can self-correct, even when it's clearly not working, it pops up in all sorts of debates. Healthcare, climate change, you name it.
So even though Reagan's gone, his legacy and this whole market fundamentalism thing, it's still with us.
It's deeply embedded in our system. It's often the starting point for any discussion about policy, even though a lot of its core ideas have been challenged and, debunked.
It's kind of unsettling, isn't it? How much of our thinking has been shaped by this ideology without us even knowing it?
It is. It's a good reminder to be critical of the stories we're told about how the world works, to question those assumptions, especially the ones about our economic system.
So we've seen how this big myth took root, spread its influence, and, caused some serious problems. But the story doesn't end there. The book also talks about how this thinking is still impacting our world today, often with pretty bad results.
Yeah, one example that really stands out is the deregulation of the airline industry back in the 70s.
Oh, right, under Carter. That was supposed to be a success story for deregulation, right?
Yeah.
Cheaper flights, more competition, everybody wins.
Yeah, on the surface it seemed like a good thing. Fares did go down at first and more people were flying. But, there's more to the story.
Okay, so what were some of the downsides that maybe weren't so obvious at first?
Well, the quality of service took a hit, and a lot of smaller airlines went out of business. It turned into this race to the bottom, with airlines cutting corners just to stay afloat.
So not exactly a win for passengers in the long run. What about the workers? How did deregulation affect them?
A lot of airline employees ended up, paying the price for this so-called free market efficiency. It led to the rise of these really powerful airline CEOs, guys like Frank Lorenzo, who, he wasn't exactly known for treating his workers well.
Yeah, it's like we've seen this before. Lower prices often mean someone's getting squeezed, whether it's workers or the environment.
It's a pattern, for sure. And it's like this trick, they shout about the benefits, but the costs, they're hidden or downplayed.
And it's not just airlines, right? The big myth talks about other examples of deregulation gone wrong.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Remember the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act in '99?
Vaguely. Remind me what that was all about.
This was a law from back in the Great Depression that basically kept commercial banking separate from investment banking. It was meant to stop banks from gambling with people's money.
So a safeguard against another financial meltdown.
Exactly. But by the 90s, the financial industry, they were pushing hard to get rid of it, saying it was outdated, stifling innovation, all that.
And they won, didn't they?
Yeah, unfortunately. Clinton signed the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which got rid of Glass-Steagall. And a lot of experts think that deregulation was a major factor in the 2008 financial crisis.
Because it let banks go back to doing those same risky things that had caused the Great Depression in the first place.
Exactly. Short-term gains for a few, long-term pain for everyone else. And, this brings us to one of the biggest consequences of this whole market fundamentalist way of thinking, growing inequality.
Yeah, let's talk about that. How does this ideology contribute to the gap between the rich and everyone else getting wider and wider?
Well, it starts with this idea that wealth trickles down from the top. So you cut
Hmm.
taxes for the rich, deregulate industries, and they'll invest more, create jobs, and everyone benefits.
But we've seen time and time again that, trickle down doesn't really work that way.
It's a myth, plain and simple. In reality, those tax cuts for the wealthy, they often just make inequality worse. More wealth and power concentrated at the top.
And everyone else is left to, fend for themselves.
It's a system that blames individuals for problems that are, built into the system itself.
Right. Like it's your fault if you're struggling, not the system's fault.
Exactly. And this market fundamentalist thinking, it leads to cuts in social programs, a shrinking safety net, and this belief that, people who are struggling just need to work harder.
But it ignores the fact that markets aren't always fair.
No, they're not. They often reflect existing power structures and can actually make inequality worse, not better.
So it's not just about working harder. It's about the system itself being rigged in certain ways.
Right. Markets don't exist in a vacuum. They're shaped by all sorts of things, social, political, historical forces, and unless we actively try to make them more just, they'll just keep making things more unequal.
This is pretty bleak stuff. It seems like market fundamentalism has caused a lot of problems while failing to deliver on its promises.
And so what's the alternative? If this blind faith in the free market isn't the answer, then what is?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one we're going to explore in the last part of our deep dive. But here's a little preview. It involves recognizing that markets have limits, that government can actually be a force for good, and that we need to prioritize the well-being of all people, not just the wealthy and powerful. All right, stay tuned, folks. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to look at the solutions the book proposes and try to figure out what a truly free and just society might actually look like. All right, so we spent the last two parts really digging into this big myth of market fundamentalism. We saw how it started, how it spread, and how it's led to some pretty worrying outcomes. But now I'm really interested in solutions. If this whole trust the free market thing isn't working, then what is?
That's the big question, right? And thankfully, the big myth actually tackles that head on. Oreskes and Conway, they present a really interesting vision of a different kind of society, one that acknowledges the limits of this whole market fundamentalist ideology.
Okay, so what are some of the key ideas? Like, how do we actually build a system that works for everyone, not just a select few?
Well, it starts with a pretty big shift in how we think about markets in the first place. They argue that we need to move away from this idea that markets are these, magical forces, that they just exist on their own, separate from human values and choices.
So it's not about getting rid of markets entirely.
No, not at all. It's more about recognizing that we actually have a role in shaping them.
Like we can influence how they work.
Exactly. Markets are created by people.
Right.
They're shaped by the rules we set, the regulations we put in place, and they can be designed to achieve different things. So it's about being more deliberate, asking ourselves, what do we actually want markets to do?
That makes sense. It's not a black and white market or no market kind of thing.
Right.
It's more nuanced than that.
It's about recognizing that markets are tools, and like any tool, they can be used for good or bad.
And that means being honest about the fact that markets don't always, deliver on their promises.
Yeah. Especially when it comes to things like social justice, protecting the environment, or just the general well-being of everyone.
Because those things don't always translate neatly into profits.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's where the government comes in. The big myth argues that we need to start seeing the government as a force for good again.
Okay, but that's a tough sell these days, isn't it?
It is.
After decades of, being told that government is the problem.
It's a real challenge, but think about it. The book gives some great examples of how government has actually tackled some huge problems in the past.
Like what?
The interstate highway system, putting a man on the moon. These were massive achievements, and they were only possible because the government was willing to think big, invest in research, and really mobilize resources to achieve these ambitious goals.
Those are pretty impressive examples. It shows that government can actually work.
It can, when it's not bogged down by ideology or captured by special interests.
So it's about having a government that's accountable to the people.
Yeah.
and focused on the common good. And that brings up another important point, democracy.
Oh, absolutely.
How does that fit into this vision of a more just society?
Well, Oreskes and Conway, they argue that a strong democracy is crucial for keeping corporations and wealthy elites in check because, they're often the ones who benefit the most from market fundamentalist policies.
So it's about making sure everyone has a say in how things are run,
Yeah.
not just those with the most money or influence.
That's it. Things like campaign finance reform, protecting voting rights, having an informed and engaged citizenry. People need to have power in their society, and that includes the autonomy.
So the big myth is really calling for a pretty fundamental shift in how we think about the relationship between the market, the government, and society as a whole.
It is. It's a challenge to the dominant narrative. It's about moving beyond this narrow focus on market fundamentalism and creating a system that puts people first.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. It
Mhm.
really makes you think about how much our worldview has been shaped by this ideology without us even realizing it.
It does. And it's a good reminder to question the assumptions we make about how things work, about our economic and political systems. There might be other, better ways of doing things.
Well, on that note, I really encourage everyone listening to check out The Big Myth for themselves. We'll put a link in the show notes. It's a book that'll make you think, challenge what you believe, and hopefully get you excited about the possibility of a different kind of future. And as always, we want to hear from you. What stood out to you? Did anything change your mind? Join the conversation, subscribe to the show, and share this with anyone who needs to hear it. Thanks for diving deep with us.